Welcome back to Invest Africa. Streamlining taxation processes on the continent not only has the potential to eliminate cumbersome administration, but could also encourage business to become formally registered, thereby expanding the tax base, increasing revenue and growing the economy.
Tax regulations and compliance of these tax laws is an important ingredient in not only funding public goods and services, but it is a social contract between citizens and the economy.
For Africa to grow and develop, right, as the middle class of Africa is growing, I mean, we need really to be able to encourage, almost all countries that tax regimes must be efficient. I mean, tax collection must be efficient. So a robust, tax regime is very important, right? I mean, a friendly tax regime is very important. I mean, clarity in tax laws are very important. And therefore, we as citizens of Africa, we must pay tax. That's the only way we can develop, this continent.
Burdensome tax administration and high rates are often regarded as a deterrent, not only to foreign investors, but to local businesses who may opt out of the formal sector due to these regulations. In recent research, where multinationals were used as a case study, it was found that a 1% point increase in the statutory corporate income tax rate directly affected the local profits from existing investments by an average of 1.3%.
It's still difficult to make your investment into many countries in Africa. The big companies with deep pockets can deal with all the issues. The smaller and the medium size and the small and micro companies have great difficulty in dealing with all the issues. So I suppose this is because a lot of FDI regulations are aimed at encouraging the big boys, the big girls, to go in and to do their thing in the resources sectors. We need more and more small business. If you have lots and lots of small business, you're going to have lots and lots more intra-regional trade, for example.
South Africa's implementation of the dividend tax in April this year was a step forward in the reduction of the tax rate for local branches of foreign companies. What this would mean is that investors can expect to pay substantially lower taxes when compared to the secondary tax on companies.
If you reduce taxation below a certain threshold, you're really going to be encouraging people to come in, and you'll make up the tax that you might have lost by the additional business that happens. The one item that comes to mind is that so many countries have weak institutions, and the institutions would obviously include the tax and other revenue gathering institutions. And until such time as those institutions have the capacity to deliver better management of all that revenue stream, we're going to move slowly forward rather than fast forward.
How taxes are raised and spent legitimizes governments and also promotes their accountability with tax-paying citizens. And it is through continued improvements of these regulations that businesses can prosper. Dimisha Makhanyele, Johannesburg.
Still with me in studio, Michael Fortmann, Associate Director, KPMG, and joining us for the second half of the show, Ernie Lai King, Tax Executive, Edward Nathan Sonnenbergs, and from our bureau in Lagos, Tunde Fowler. He's the Chairman, Lagos State Inland Revenue Service. Gentlemen, thanks again for your time. Let's start with withholding tax and what we're seeing on that front. Ernie, is it a big problem for doing business on the African continent, specifically for multinationals trying to get some ground?
Withholding taxes in itself is not a problem. I mean, it's a well-known, accepted type of tax all over the world. You have double tax treaties that minimize or moderate those withholding taxes, and it's a feature of the individual company's negotiating ability with their double tax treaties in order to moderate that withholding tax. I don't think withholding tax in itself is a problem.
Let's throw it to you, Tunde. I know that Nigeria puts a withholding tax of up to 10% on certain outbound payments. Have you had any issues on this front?
No, we haven't. The rate is quite competitive when compared with other countries in the sub-region, and we have no issue with the rates.
double tax agreements. Are there enough double tax agreements when it comes to the African continent, Michael?
I think if you look in certain jurisdictions, if you look in sort of East Africa, there are quite a few with their neighbouring territories. But I think if we look across the whole continent, there definitely aren't enough double taxation agreements in place to be able to get the kind of relief that Ernie's talking about, I think.
And that's the reality. I mean, let's talk about this. If you don't have a double tax agreement in place, you could be taxed twice on the income that you are earning. Is that right, Ernie?
That's correct.
Or am I simplifying the situation?
No, I think that's a fair summing up of the position. That's the whole reason for double tax treaties, and to avoid the double taxation. The South Africa stands in a very fortunate position in that we have quite an extensive double tax treaty network, and it stands us in good stead as we move forward into the era of the African continent, to use South Africa as a platform to invest into the rest of Africa, and we are seeing that happening. South Africa has some competition as far as Mauritius is concerned, but Mauritius is having a few problems with its Indian Mauritian tax treaty. But overall, South Africa, in terms of the infrastructure, the good financial institutions, the corporate governance, the size of the economy, size of our double tax treaty network, South Africa in itself is well placed.
Tunde, let's throw it back to you in Lagos, and as Michael mentioned just a short while ago, East Africa, the East Africa community has a number of double tax agreements or double tax treaties in place. What about West Africa? What's happening on that front?
Well, recently we've just put together a group called YT, which is the West African Institute of Taxation, and that's supposed to look into these issues. But presently, where we have issues of double taxation, and we look at our main trading partners, which might be Ghana on the West African coast, we have treaties in place already.
In terms of other countries, obviously, that you trade with, surely this is a significant deterrent to the ease of doing business when it comes to multinationals playing in West Africa.
Yes, you've got to realize that in West Africa, the Nigerian economy and the Ghanaian economy are the largest. The other economies, like in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and other sub-countries, who do a little bit of trade with Nigeria, but not that much, really.
Now let's talk about transfer pricing. Michael, let's start with you, and perhaps for a layperson out there, let's get a definition of what transfer pricing actually is.
Okay, transfer pricing is actually the pricing of goods in two countries, so two entities in different countries.
Same company though?
So, well, an associated company, so they will be connected. So they might have the same parent holding company, or they might be two subsidiaries of the same holding company. So in effect, they are connected, they can control the price, and it depends on how they manipulate their prices, whether they are able to get it more efficient for the multinational.
And that's the term that we need to be cognizant of here, manipulate the price to get a better deal for the multinational. Yes. It's a big concern in terms of being able to regulate that environment, isn't it, Ernie?
Transfer pricing is quite an issue internationally, and different jurisdictions take it far more seriously than others. But ultimately, what to watch out for is where multinationals or connected companies try to manipulate their profits into a country with a lower tax rate. So the country with the higher tax rate finds that its tax base is exported to the country with a lower tax rate. And we have OECD, the Organization of Cooperation and Economic Development. We have guidelines as to what is acceptable transfer pricing and what isn't. And if I talk about South Africa, we have just from the 1st of April this year changed our transfer pricing rules.
Tunde, are you trying to close the loophole when it comes to transfer pricing? Is it a big focus area of yours in Nigeria?
No, it's not. Basically, right now in Nigeria, we have one of the lower tax rates in the West African sub-region. So we don't have a problem with a high level of taxation or the rates.
If you were to look at a single solution for tax on the continent, would that mean you need a single document that puts the same rules across for every country operating on the continent?
I think you do need to try to harmonise the legislation across the continent. to be able to say a single document, I don't know whether that is, you know, practical or whether
probably living in La La Land.
Exactly, but we can always dream, I suppose. I think to try to get more harmonization, to make sure that the tax administrations are up to the standards that they need to be able to apply the legislation in the correct method, you know, be able to communicate with the taxpayers, have those good relationships with the taxpayers. And I think the other thing is obviously to broaden the tax base. I mean, in Africa we have a large informal sector that obviously doesn't get caught in the tax base. And by being more transparent, by governments working together, I think we will find ways and best practice to be able to incorporate those into our tax base.
How quickly are we improving the tax environment on the continent, Ernie?
The South African tax authorities have done a good job over the last 10 years. If you look at the figures of tax revenue to GDP across the continent, you'll find that the African continent lags behind the OECD countries. In South Africa, our tax revenue collection to percentage GDP is quite high compared to our African neighbours. We're around 27%, 28%. If you recall, the CATS Commission, some years ago, they recommended a tax revenue to GDP percentage of around about 25% in order not to hinder economic development. If you look at the OECD countries, more developed countries, of course, their tax revenue to GDP is around 30%. If you look at Africa overall, excluding South Africa, you're looking at only about 15%.
Tunde, when it comes to tax collection, the tax environment in Nigeria, how are you doing? Are you making big inroads when it comes to the collection of taxes?
Yes, we are. Right now, Nigeria as a country has seen that we cannot rely on oil revenue. And just like was said earlier on, the West African countries average about 15% in terms of tax revenue against GDP. Lagos State has basically taken the lead because we have 3 levels of governments. We have the federal that collect taxes through FIRS, and the state boards of internal revenue, and the local governments. Well, at the state level, we've been able to increase revenue taxation by over 400% over the last 10 years. And so we've been able to also educate the taxpaying public on the laws and why they should pay taxes, and we continue to improve.
Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. Appreciate your insights. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Invest Africa. We'll be back again at the same time next week. Until then, from me, Bronwyn, Nielsen, and my guests, it's goodbye.